The last time the United States hosted the FIFA World Cup, the entire landscape looked different. After all, this was 1994, where football may have a lock on most of the world, but soccer hadn't yet caught fire in the States. It majorly lagged behind the likes of baseball, basketball, the NFL and others. There were fears, many in fact, that this could be a complete abject sporting failure. And yet, in spite of it all, this tournament shattered records. Not least was this World Cup seeing more people fill stadiums than before or since. Legends were created, memories made, but it came with some demons too. Loss, heartbreak and one of football's finest bailed out in scandal. There are hundreds of tales within this overarching narrative, so let's bounce on forwards, open up those archives, delve inside and uncover the story of the last time the USA hosted the FIFA World Cup. FIFA awarded the 1994 World Cup to the United States in 1988, raising eyebrows across the footballing world. As much as it may have come as a surprise to some, particularly journalists across Europe, the United States' bid delegation, fronted by Werner Fricker, was meticulous in its planning to secure the victory to host the tournament. They had learned from their previous efforts, having failed in a bid to host the 1986 FIFA World Cup when Colombia had pulled out. That bid was hurried and hasty. This one had all the I's dotted and all the T's crossed. They would go on to defeat rival bid makers Brazil and Morocco, securing 10 of 19 votes from FIFA delegates. There were, however, misgivings regarding the United States hosting. On the footballing front, the United States men's national team hadn't qualified for the World Cup since 1950. They were streets behind the likes of Mexico and even Canada. Off the pitch, troubles had been afoot for soccer in the country just a mere 3 years before the declaration. In 1985, the North American Soccer League had collapsed into financial ruin and folded, leaving the nation with no professional soccer league, no competitive player base and no real pipeline of talent. In spite of this, FIFA had its eyes on something much bigger. That was the untapped commercialisation of soccer in the American market and near 250 million potential consumers of the beautiful game if they could be reached. The growth opportunity for FIFA was major, be it television revenue or sponsorship. The potential of major expansion into a new region was something that no other host could match, and therefore maybe the risk could be worth it. Still though, there were conditions and caveats attached. The US had to promise to build a lasting football legacy, not just a one-off spectacle. This meant a commitment to launching a brand new professional league, one that would thrive long after the tournament's conclusion. It was a strong pledge for a nation with such little football culture and pedigree. They knew that the promise was the only way to deliver the tournament to their shores. This would eventually see the creation of Major League Soccer in 1996, an institution still rumbling on nearly 30 years later. And thus the countdown to the tournament had begun. Questions hung in the air, criticism was locked and loaded to be fired at FIFA if it failed. Could the USA really deliver a World Cup worthy of its name? Would Americans largely unfamiliar with the game's traditions fill the stands, or would the tournament be played in front of empty seats, humiliating both the nation and FIFA as a whole? It was a gamble and a half, and the world would be watching in anticipation. By the summer of 1994, the stage was finally set. The wondering of whether the US could deliver a World Cup befitting of its importance would be answered. Everything is bigger in the US of A, and that was never truer than seeing the size of the stadiums. Los Angeles' Rose Bowl sat with a 94,000 seater capacity. Stanford Stadium in San Francisco, nearly 85,000. Giant Stadium in New York, 76,000. No stadium was smaller than 50k. If the tournament were to flop, it would be undoubtedly noticeable. As my fiance says so, size is only one of the issues. Another was, how do you tap into the American consumer market? This was a nation that was used to a far different structure of sports, designed around frequent stoppages and fanfare in between, not soccer's continuous 45-minute clock. Scoring could also be a problem. Touchdowns, slam dunks, home runs were often plentiful. The concept of a 0-0 draw was almost alien to a US audience. The answer to this was to lean into good old-fashioned American showmanship. This could not just be a sporting event, but a spectacle too. There had to be a sense of give and take though too, with scepticism from some of the nations travelling to the tournament who were wary of empty seats and quiet crowds. Adjustments had to be made. American broadcasters would have to adapt to the rhythms of the sport with no breaks for commercials. Kickoff times would have to be bent to fit to television schedules that would benefit the whole world, even if it meant players playing in punishing midday heat to appease European audiences. That would be achieved as we headed for the tournament's opening match at Soldier Field in Chicago. Germany, the reigning champions, were taking on Bolivia. But before we get to that, the US had to announce itself to the world in its own unique way, with a lavish, over-the-top opening ceremony. There had been opening ceremonies before, but they were usually shows of grandeur, and this wasn't that. Amongst a mix of colour and pageantry, out pops Diana Ross from a helicopter. She decides to have a little sing-song before that infamous moment. She steps up to take a penalty, which was built to be almost unmissable, and well, yeah, she misses it. See, the goal was meant to split open as she scored, but well, since she didn't, it went a bit flat. But you know, in many ways, it's a great symbol of America's slightly uncomfortable embrace of the World Cup, which perhaps now is a bit more endearing than awkward. And with that, at last, the football was ready to begin. Now, the 1994 FIFA World Cup had oodles of storylines, covering the full gamut of emotions. Beauty, pride, heartbreak, panic, and a little insanity. Icons were made, legends fell. There's a plethora of tales to be told in this one World Cup alone. The group stage set the tone from the outset. Argentina arrived with a now 33-year-old Diego Maradona, who, having served a 15-month ban for cocaine use, had appeared to trim his weight down rather dramatically. Having ballooned to over £200, Maradona remarkably came into this World Cup 44 pounds lighter, looking fit and ready. In Argentina's opening match, they lit up a shell-shocked Greece with a 4-0 win, in which Diego scored a cracker. But when he ran up to the camera to celebrate, well, there were certainly question marks. Days later, after another match with Nigeria, Maradona failed a drugs test, having tested positive to taking performance-enhancing drugs, and just like that, his international career was over. One of the greatest players of all time had bowed out in scandal, and with it, he took away Argentina's chances. And the team that knocked him out was Romania, a nation spearheaded by the brilliance of Gheorghe Hagi, a left-footed visionary who orchestrated Romania's attack with flair and ruthlessness. His goal versus Colombia in the group stage would end up being one of the standout moments of the entire tournament. At the quarter-final stage, they would bail out on penalties against Sweden, who themselves had a marvellous tournament, finishing in third place, with Martin Dahlin and Kenneth Anderson scoring 9 goals between them. However, neither finished as top scorer. That distinction was shared by another 2 players who played for 2 less than fancied nations. The first was Oleg Salenko, who, after scoring a penalty in a 3-1 defeat to Sweden in the second group match, pushed on and scored a record-breaking 5 goals in one match against Cameroon in a 6-1 victory, a record that still stands to this very day. Yet this feat wasn't the only record recorded in this match, as Cameroon's only goal came from a 42-year-old Roger Milla, the World Cup's oldest ever goalscorer. Russia still ended up being knocked out in the group stage, and those 6 goals from Oleg Salenko were the only goals he ever scored for Russia. The other goal scoring extraordinaire was Bulgaria's Hristo Stoichkov, who matched Salenko's tally across the tournament. Bulgaria as a whole would have an unforgettable World Cup themselves, as they finished ahead of Argentina in the group stage and knocked out the much fancied Germany in the quarter-finals, Stoichkov notching goals against both sides. It's fair to say this tournament really was one for the underdogs, and the hosts were also keen to get in on the act. Despite their less than stellar pedigree, they managed to make the last 16, falling to a sole Bebeto goal against Brazil. But it was their match with Colombia in the group stage that led to one of the World Cup's most sobering moments. Colombia had been highly regarded heading into the 1994 World Cup, with the likes of Pelé tipping them for a potential surprise victory. Having defeated Argentina 5-0 in Buenos Aires during qualification and having stars such as Carlos Valderrama and Faustino Asprilla, it was not beyond the realms of possibility that they could be a real force at the tournament. Coupling this though was major political instability back home. The nation was led by the drug cartels and violence was rife, and as such, football was seen as an escape from those problems. However, from the opening game, this was all unravelling. Colombia was stunned by Romania in their opening match as reports quickly emerged of death threats towards the players. The next match had to end without defeat, but 35 minutes in, a low cross was driven in and in an attempt to block it, defender Andres Escobar deflected it into his own net as Colombia went on to lose the match and were knocked out of the competition. Days after returning home, a dejected Andres Escobar felt he had to go out and apologise to the people despite being advised against it. Escobar would never return home that night as he was shot 6 times in the early hours of the morning outside of a nightclub. He had been due to sign a contract with AC Milan after the tournament. It stands today as one of the most harrowing moments in World Cup history. In spite of all the underdog stories of Bulgaria, Romania, Sweden and the United States, and all the tales of distress of fancied nations such as Argentina, Colombia and Germany, it would be 2 Goliaths that would meet in the final. Brazil, known for their samba football, had been rather defensive and structured at this one, although Romario and Bebeto did notch 8 goals between them. Italy were carried immensely by the brilliance of Roberto Baggio. The tournament averaged 2.7 goals per match, a number that hasn't been beaten since, but the final would end up being a cagey 0-0 draw, and for the first time in World Cup history, the winner would be decided on penalties. As Baresi and Massaro missed for Italy, it would all fall on the shoulders of Italy's defining man, Baggio, to keep them in the shootout. He stepped up with everything on the line and blazed his penalty over the bar as Brazil took home the crown. He stood alone, head bowed, devastated. Brazil were champions once more. It may have been uglier than usual from them, but after 24 years without lifting a World Cup, they were back and ready to kickstart another golden generation. FIFA's decision to award the United States the 1994 World Cup was based on the stipulation that the tournament must have a lasting legacy. It was a tough ask. Soccer was niche in the US before this. Whether it could leave an imprint on the nation was undoubtedly a gamble. Yet nearly 30 years on, the echoes of that summer are still felt. The US was certainly a curious host. Stadiums built for all manner of sports other than soccer had to be converted to World Cup standards. A big question mark was whether the people of America would vote with their feet, but they really did. This World Cup ended as the most watched World Cup in stadiums ever, a record not yet beaten to this day, although that is likely to change at next summer's tournament. Of course, the Bald Eagle Nation had to make it spectacular. They had to make it pageantry and show-like, which may have upset the traditionalists, but the football was bloody good too. The tournament planted the seeds for professional soccer to make a remarkable comeback. Attendance records shattered, television ratings exceeded, the demand for the sport had become undeniable. Major League Soccer would launch within 3 years, which has given the opportunity for talent to flourish within the domestic scene, and has culminated in the US only missing 1 tournament since. By the 2002 World Cup, the United States reached the quarter-finals, a feat unlikely to have been achieved had they have not hosted this most precious of events. FIFA had been determined to tap into the American market, and it was clear the US was ready to embrace the world's game. The kids who attended matches or watched on TV or simply collected Panini stickers grew up seeing soccer as more than just an exotic curiosity. They would become players, coaches and fans. The legacy of USA 94 can't be measured in traditional metrics, but can be viewed as a major transformational shift in the footballing landscape. Every American goal since, every sold out stadium, every young person inspired owes a debt to that summer in 1994, when an awkward nation lit up the world. And as we look forward to the next World Cup hosted on American soil, alongside its neighbours in both Canada and Mexico, it's worth paying a homageful nod to the last one that played out on this continent. The 2026 FIFA World Cup will have a lot to live up to, both on and off the pitch. However, if it manages even a fraction of the success and legacy that the last one has, we'll be in for one hell of a summer. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching.